Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon, from the historical documentary, Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. How to buy board games. Use money. Stealing board games from shops, conventions, and small children is frowned upon. Go to jail. Real jail. Don't collect any money at all. I developed a system for buying board games specifically for use on this channel. Before I digitized the process, I stumbled from purchase to purchase. You'll have your own mad method of doing things unless you really are just a beginner and need to develop a mad method. Remember the golden rule. Buying board games is not about buying board games. It's about buying storage for all the board games you'll buy. Board game enthusiasts develop easily picked up skills. They can tell a pocket card game from a coffin box war game at 50 paces. There. Even as a beginner, you've just absorbed that skill yourself. The Kallax is a radioactive goblin found in the first printing of the Fiend Folio, a supplement released into the wild for the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. Created by Ian Livingstone, OGC, the Kallax lies restive between the Germaline and the Kamadan, and is a distant relative of a similar goblinoidal creature, the invisible Lance Myxter. You'll find Lance Myxter listed between Kuatoa, budget versions of H.P. Lovecraft's Fish People, and the Lamia Noble, a topless snake lady with a title and a manor at the edge of a mist-bedecked lake. Think of the building as a female version of the Playboy Mansion, housing a younger copy of Hugh Hefner, who happens to be a woman with a crushing interest in coiling up beside the fire of a cold winter's eve. The hybrid invisible radioactive goblinoid, the Kallax Lance Myxter, has 300 hit points, granted in error by the great god Typo. For that reason alone, the creature is a fearsome foe, and that is a board gaming fact. Technically, it's a role-playing game fact. Even more technically, it's a pack of lies. Game designer Ian Livingstone was awarded the Order of the Gelatinous Cube in 2006 and has the right to carry a six-sided die made of jelly across Westminster Bridge without let or hindrance. That really is a board gaming fact. But let's hear from the Undead Viking, Lance Myxter himself. Here he is on his alabum, which is Minnesotan for backside. It has been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon. Nothing much happened this week, except to say that I was feeling kinda peckish when I stumbled in shock through the glass door of the Chatterbox Cafe, stunned by the sight of a ghostly Gary Gygax, seated with his back to the window, opposite my favorite chair in the Leif Erikson Memorial booth. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather fall. "Take a pew," Gygax motioned, setting a hoard of translucent polyhedral dice behind a transparent Dungeon Master's screen, with see-through dungeon notes fluttering gently in a ghostly breeze atop the decidedly opaque and very real table. Needless to say, though I've been saying it at great length since the incident, I realized the ghostly Gary Gygax had just invited me to play one more game with him. Perhaps he had unfinished business on Earth, I mused. Luckily, as an industry professional, working as I do with edible board games, I always carry essential gaming equipment in the event that a random adventure breaks out on Main Street. I reached into my own personal bag of holding, which is a bag that holds stuff, and I rooted around in the swirl of objects. A compass, a pillbox-style container holding 4.5 all-weather safety matches, 2 vouchers for good eats, and as fine a set of polyhedral dice as ever graced a gaming table, or indeed a cafe one. Rolled on the thighs of Cuban maidens, my Havana dice set saw me through the Temple of Elemental Doom, Fridge Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Elminster in the Last But One Crusade. I never managed to play Baldur's Gate and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It was 4th edition D&D, and we had no truck with that in my basement. The sight of a ghostly Gary Gygax took me back to the days when I didn't have a pot to piss in, or any piss to piss in a pot that I didn't have. In those days, when Old School was the only game in town, and we didn't even know it, we knew that Old School was the only game in town. I passed the afternoon playing a solo dungeon with the ghost of Gary Gygax, and took this away from the experience: a ream of A4 character sheets killed off from combat round to combat round quicker than I could roll some of them up. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women have 1800 strength, all the men have high charisma scores, and all the children roll above average dice. I suspect some of those dice are weighted, as true above average dice are on average statistically unlikely. You can have true dice, or dice deviating from the average, but there are no old bold heroes, except in Valhalla, which is quite a rowdy tavern on the blasted edge of a post-apocalyptic St. Paul, in which I shortly expect to start off a dungeon adventure or two. One thing you won't see on this channel is the dreaded wall of games, nestled in a Swedish storage unit named Kallax. I have far more books here than I have games, and for that reason I roll with a tall, wide, deep style of bookcase. This channel certainly is about tabletop games. However, my experience lies heavily in role-playing games and not so heavily in board games. There aren't that many board games here to show off in bookcases. I see plenty of YouTubers flashing their game credentials by lining the back wall with 300-plus games on those Swedish shelves. And that's when I play a video game of my own invention. I look to see how many of those games are on my shelves. Unsurprisingly, the answer is usually 0, 1, or 2. That's about it. As I forge this video, there are around 3,000 board games being released annually. How many of those could you fit on your shelves? Depends on how many of them are small card games. How many of those shelves will take over a room and spill out into other rooms? I've been down this path before with books, and I'm here to tell you, this does not end well. A quick poll of games informs me that I have only 2 coffin box-sized epics in my small collection, and I'm with Charles Bronson on this one. That's too many. You don't need a wall of games behind you to enjoy games, and you don't truly need a wall of games to run a board gaming channel. I'm getting by on fewer than 100 board games right now, though board game expansions take up space too. That's a complex issue involving the laws of physics, and according to Star Trek, we can't change those. One of the major problems you'll encounter as a beginner is the realization that a game comes out of the box and won't go back in. Blame the cardboard frames, the punchboard scaffold holding all the counters and tokens in tight factory set formation. Martial art your way through these sheets and the unholy truth dawns, counter by counter. Boards may indeed not head back, as Bruce Lee points out, but they don't need to when they are punchboards. Their revenge in being punched comes in messing with you as they die. The last counter comes out and you see these stacks of gold coins or cardboardy monsters just won't fit neatly back into the box. Then you learn there's an expansion and an expansion to the expansion. Your game will fit on the shelf in 2 parts. Part 1, the original game box, and Part 2, whatever you buy to keep the rest of the game in. The game box holds the rule book, and beside it you soon have a briefcase, a suitcase, a fishing tackle box, a mini fridge, and the type of basket that fits to the underside of a hot air balloon. A week after that, the raw recruit to the board game world lies in tatters, having discovered the custom organizer. Keep everything in the one box, that game box, including the expansion and a goldfish bowl, for the price of a trip to the moon and back. Buying board games is about buying storage for board games, and not merely for reasons of space, also for reasons of time. Why? Another thing you won't see on this channel is the game setup process for larger games. Game setup goes swiftly, smoothly, if you have enough storage to hold all the animals 2 by 2. Meanwhile, gameplay videos cut setup time down to no time at all. Storage plays its part, though editing has a great deal to contribute. You need storage for components and storage for the boxes storing your components. Assembling all that shelving cuts down on time left over for gaming. Luckily, storage solutions speed setup and the whole mess more or less balances out. So the first thing to consider when getting into the board gaming world is space. Where are your shelves going? If you don't have a measuring instrument to hand 5 seconds after buying your first game, fear not. The world will impose measuring sticks and tapes and lasers upon you. Let us suppose that you are looking for board games. You gave your hard-backed Chuck Tingle collection to a sweet old lady behind the counter of a tweedy little charity shop, and there's an entire floor-to-ceiling bookcase available now that those mighty tomes are gone. Pummeled in the butt by my empty bookcase, a Chuck Tingle Velociraptor helicopter board game romance. Setting this channel up took endless time and feverish effort. Buying games online is effortless, too effortless. In the dark ages, back when the Old Testament was new, we used dusty rugs, RUGS, remote, unfriendly game shops. We cast arcane spells to locate these antique shops with their even more antique owners and set off on flying carpets in search of adventure. Those flying carpets grew seedier shop by shop. Board game shops fell into 4 dusty categories. 1. Toy shops that dabbled in board games. 2. Model shops with walls of German tanks closing in on a half-wall of board games and a cardboard box of role-playing games. 3. The newsagent with a quarter room in the back. The owner tried a new line in 6 games just to see how the trade went. 4. The dedicated game shop, remote, unfriendly, and stacked with almost as many panzers as the actual model shop was. Rugs were manned by wizardy wizards who wouldn't think twice about asking rando customers to mind the shop while I'm out the back having an unmentioned jazz cigarette. These places had no room to swing a cliché, never mind a cat. I always think of them as long, thin corridors with the panzer boxes threatening to topple from one side and the modelling paints about to burst their lids and consume all comers and a blanket of fumes that part kills you and part sends you higher than the fucking stratosphere over on the other side, preserving what's left of you under a tacky veneer of metallic gloop. Rugs came with dust and were packed 10 deep when you struggled in to consider buying a game, or else they were empty, utterly empty, devoid of human life, and quite possibly bug life too. Assisted by marijuana or tepidly low levels of LSD, the wizardy wizard stumbled in. Absolutely no shoplifting ever went on in those narrow dusty catacombs, with the wizard off casting a Mary Jane spell. 20 people packed into the confines, dancing a conga to reach the hallowed game, spy through cracks in the throng. Of course stock vanished. The wizardy wizard may have noticed through the drug-addled haze, but who can say? I like to think of the wizardy wizard casting a detect shoplifter spell and then not giving a flying fuck about the result of that magical action. Yes, I am dancing around the prospect of wondering how the rugs survived. Perhaps drugs played a part in rugs. If you make too much money trading in illicit backdoor merchandise, it is prudent to take minor losses from stock shrinkage in the front of the premises. But this is wild surmise of the worst kind. Rugs don't exist today. Insert stifled laughter here. Remote, unfriendly game shops are still out there somewhere in the darkness of retail, but they're dying out. What kills them off? Internet purchases force physical shops to innovate or blow away dustily in the wind. The natural extension of the game shop is a game shop that opens late a few nights a week for gameplay. That's when the tables come out and there's your gaming experience for customers. Perhaps this is a free service, or there's a nominal table rental fee to keep the hordes from bursting the building at the seams. Either way, the shopkeeper is looking to make money from further gaming purchases while players are in. Get a regular crowd stumbling out of the night to your door and find another way to make the shop work. This turns the shop into an unofficial board gaming club with the advantage of having games to purchase right there on site. It is an unwritten law that Magic the Gathering players are sequestered, banished to a particular night of the week to keep them away from the regular punters. Out of the idea of the game shop that allows gaming on the premises, there developed the concept of the board game cafe. Run a cafe, sell food, charge a table fee to play board games selected from the wall of choice. This hybrid business model doesn't fit into a cupboard the way those dusty game shops squeezed in. Board game cafes can be seedy, but retail paradise is about having a well-lit, spacious area with friendly, knowledgeable staff who know the way around a board game or 200 and who will serve you food that doesn't force a drastic Dungeons & Dragons-style save-or-die moment upon your party of hardy adventurers. And there'll be games to purchase, technically second-hand, but at least you're seeing what's in the box as you buy, which isn't the case with the online second-hand market. I won't get into buying second-hand board games with you, as I haven't gone down that path. You should be fine if you're buying used games in a board game cafe. It's time to turn to my method of buying games for this channel. I've bought games in dusty shops, newsagents, at conventions, and online. Now I buy online, whether nationally or internationally. Kickstarter is another digital avenue, a delayed action form of online purchasing. I bought a few Kickstarter projects specifically for this channel, but for reasons of quickness I'm better off buying from online shops. With thousands of games published annually, where to start? I use a price comparison site called Board Game Prices. This is expanding its reach as I speak, and there may be a version in your country's internet. First, I signed up for their regular emails, had a chance to win a copy of Pandemic. Didn't win. When I knew I hadn't won, I used the site to buy the cheapest copy online. The weekly email throws a list of games at you. This is a mixture of so-called hot games and obscure items that even the designers themselves haven't heard of. Was that all a dream? Yes, there are gems in the weekly email, but even sifting through the dross tells you a lot about games. For beginners, I recommend sifting through a lot of dross. Anyway, the site itself serves up a price comparison list with direct links to the BGG database. If you discover a game first through BGG, fair enough, but if you hear of a game elsewhere, use Board Game Prices to check availability and price, and then click through to the BGG for specific game information, if that information exists. The system is not guaranteed to throw the cheapest game at you. You'll find the cheapest game listed at £20, but no one is selling at all as the game went out of print. Or you'll find the cheapest version on a shopping site that isn't listed on Board Game Prices, not in connection with that one tricky game you're after. Be aware of the market's quirks. Remember that a small card game available for $999 in Canadian cash is not a rare game, it is an out-of-print game. I bought Fury of Dracula when the 3rd edition was in print about a microsecond before it went out of print. As soon as it went out of print, the online prices skyrocketed. Today you can buy a 3rd edition copy for 10 times the cost of the 4th edition, even though the 4th edition is the 3rd edition printed by a different company with the added feature of painted figures instead of unpainted ones. So for 10 times the cost of a painted game, you can pay to have the rare, almost identical unpainted game instead. Thanks, but no thanks. Ace Detective is the most expensive game in my collection. I bought it for a tenner, including postage. When I went looking for cheap and cheerful copies, a tenner fit the bill nicely. The alternative was to purchase the game from Canada and spend $999 plus import duty at a fifth of the total inflated price. No thanks. That copy of Tide of Iron is going online for... Oh, it isn't, not any longer. Out of print and out of print all over again under a second company. I saw it not selling fast for hundreds of pounds. Today, checking I see it's very hard to find one copy going on eBay for around £60, slightly cheaper than the £600 it was going for last time I looked. Here we must invoke Vassal's law of board games. If an out-of-print game is good enough, it will come back into print, with the warning that some games fall out of print when publishing rights expire and are not taken up again on favourable terms to all parties concerned, or are not even offered again at all. Vassal's law is not a law of physics, but rather a warning not to spend exorbitant amounts of cash on a supposedly rare game. Find a cheap copy somewhere, or wait for the game to return to print. Better still, take the same amount of cash and spend it on many, many games you could be playing right now. Anyway, that's a quirk thrown up by the marketplace. Seeing a game available for hundreds, the seller is, frankly, at it. Use a price comparison site. Scout out the best deals and buy your game. By all means, support a local or semi-local physical game shop. You'll have the game in hand right there in the shop and can check that all the components are inside the box before you trek home across the length of Mordor. I came away from a shop, the newsagent's, with that strange foreboding and sat on a wall a little way down from the place to open the game up. Missing components. A short walk back, and I swapped the game for another one. There were 2 games I wanted, and money enough for one. The game with missing parts was the only copy in the shop, and so I switched to the alternative purchase. Leaving empty-handed is a cruel blow best avoided, and we had a lot of fun out of the purchased game, and not as if I bought a bad one that day. Looking back on that incident, I'm reminded that coming away from game shops, we made time to check stuff out before leaving the big city for home, and I see now that the game I abandoned didn't fare well when added to the BGG database. Dodged a bullet there. In the digital world, is there an equivalent of sitting on that wall before trudging home with a game? We check out games and online videos before we order a game in. What of the BGG? Suppose you head over to the game database and don't find a video. There are several reasons for this lack of video footage. 1. The game isn't out yet, but for marketing, the company adds basic details to the database. 2. It's a war game. These are often without videos. 3. The game is older and out of print, and no one feels like making a video about a game you can't get hold of. 4. No one is playing the game. 5. Legal reasons, whatever the hell those are. As far as BGG ratings are concerned, they are opinions. Rating 1. Smidge from Sweden doesn't like it. #sad face. The BGG site points you to particular designers, certain companies, and specific types of game. You'll read opinions, stare at images, see videos, and come to your own conclusions. Price, availability, playability, game length, number of players, level of complexity, nature of the game. You'll learn about those things in a physical shop just as you'll learn them online. How to buy board games? First, consider available space. Then, hunt games out in shops and online. Find out what you like. Price comes into it, of course. Remember Vassal's Law, which translates as, don't pay $999 for a game that costs a tenner. If you can reach a gaming club, a board game cafe, a convention, try those out and see what works for you. This isn't a board game review channel, so I'm not pelted with free games at every opportunity. The term free does not allow for time spent in dealing with free games, I'm sure, so I can't recommend starting up a review channel in order to receive games. That way, madness lies.